This is CBC Here and Now.
Newfoundland and Labrador is an essential element and player in the Atlantic Loop.
The Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister is visiting the province today. Here and Now's Peter Cowan will bring you the latest on Chrystia Freeland's visit and her comments on the Atlantic Loop just ahead.
For one Mount Pearl woman, the care provided for her father in long-term care has been raising red flags.
It's very, very difficult for me to try and focus on anything else other than my dad, just because they kept calling me for every little thing.
What she thinks needs to change, coming up as newest part of the CBC series concerning care.
This is a professional industry and we expect everybody to live up to that professional standard.
Mandatory registration, inspections, and even fines. Tougher rules are now in place for people who operate short-term rental accommodations. Good evening and welcome to Here and Now. Well, is Newfoundland and Labrador out of the loop? The federal budget promises to help make the Atlantic Loop a reality. It mentions Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia, but not Newfoundland and Labrador. Now, the finance minister is in town today to sell her budget. Here and Now's Peter Cowan was at Chrystia Freeland's press conference that wrapped up about an hour ago in Mount Pearl. He joins us now live from the newsroom to break it all down. So, Peter, what's happening with the Atlantic Loop?
Well, the whole idea of the Atlantic Loop is to loop in all of the Atlantic provinces so that they can share electricity. So Newfoundland and Labrador not getting mentioned in the budget has raised some eyebrows here. Now, the Finance Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, was in St. John's today, and she faced questions about why her budget didn't mention this province's involvement in the loop. The discussions are happening about how to progress with the loop, and she says representatives from here are part of those discussions. She was asked this afternoon why the budget didn't reflect that.
Of course, Newfoundland and Labrador is an essential partner, player, member in the Atlantic Loop. So let me be really, really clear and categorical about that.
So if we're so important, why weren't we mentioned in the budget? Well, it comes down to timing. The provinces and federal government are trying to figure out which part of the loop is doable first. Dominic LeBlanc, the Intergovernmental Affairs Minister, said today the first part of the project will be better connections between Quebec and the Maritimes.
This particular phase of the Atlantic Loop, the backbone project, as you know, would be to upgrade the interprovincial transmission between Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. So it's not directly related to the challenges that may be happening at Muskrat, but our hope obviously is to have at one point a loop that takes the green renewable energy from Newfoundland and Labrador. Some of it will go through Quebec, some of it will cross the Gulf of St. Lawrence into Nova Scotia.
Now, the urgency with this project is Nova Scotia has to get off its dirty coal by 2030, so they're looking for projects that can happen quickly. But what about here in this province? Is the Premier worried? Well, he was asked today in the House of Assembly, and here's how he responded to a question from the opposition.
There is no loop without Newfoundland and Labrador. It's a simple matter of distribution, Mr. Speaker, and generation, Mr. Speaker. The transmission lines themselves cannot generate electrons. We all know that. We have an incredible resource in Labrador, Mr. Speaker, that can be, will be, should be, and is recognized by the federal government as being critical with the Atlantic Loop.
Now, the federal budget did contain one area that could be a big help to the province's energy system. There's a 15% tax credit available for Newfoundland and Labrador hydro. So what could they use it for? Well, it could be used to help pay for the $500 million upgrade that the utility wants to do to the Bay d'Espoir hydro dam, or it could be used to help lower the cost of developing the Gull Island project, a new source of power that could be key to feed into the Atlantic Loop. Reporting live in the newsroom, I'm Peter Cowan for Here and Now.
In the Strait of Belle, even icebreakers are having a tough time getting through. A Labrador Marine ferry got stuck in the ice on the weekend and had to turn back. Labrador Marine is now flying passengers between Blanc-Sablon and St. Barbe and hopes an icebreaker from Quebec might become available tomorrow. Flights are being offered to passengers at the same price as the ferry. According to Labrador Marine, 47 people were moved by air yesterday and 4 flights were made available today.
Well, speaking of ice, take a look at this photo. This is a river otter who has found a snack, it looks like, but it was a beautiful day for Mark Gray to capture this photo. He said he hasn't seen anything like this before, and this was certainly a great one for him to capture. Now, like I said, a beautiful day today. Temperatures in the single digits, about 3 degrees in Bonavista, 4 in Terra Nova, and the hotspot was actually in Badger. Now, up across Labrador, those temperatures are still mainly below 0, but as you head towards Happy Valley Goose Bay and then Cartwright, those temperatures are a bit above. So as we take a look at what's going on right now, we got a little bit of blue sky out there showing up on the camera. Temperatures currently hovering around 2 degrees, but we do have some windy conditions, or at least breezy today, out of the west around 28 kilometers per hour, gusting near 41. But these winds are going to ramp up, especially as we head towards the early morning hours for the west coast, parts of coastal areas of Labrador as well. And that will continue through a good chunk of the day. We're talking about winds between 70, maybe even 80 kilometers per hour. Break the full forecast down coming up.
Thanks, Ashley. Well, now to court on the West Coast. A Corner Brook man is pleading not guilty to attempted murder. 32-year-old Evan Long was arrested on March 5th, 2 days after an injured 57-year-old man showed up at the RNC detachment in Corner Brook. Long is facing charges of attempted murder, aggravated assault, assault with a weapon, and possession of a weapon for a dangerous purpose. Police say an axe was used in the alleged attack. Long has received support in previous court appearances. People were outside waving signs as he was escorted from the courthouse. The accused has elected to be tried by judge and jury in the Supreme Court. A preliminary inquiry on 2 of the charges has been scheduled to begin at the end of May. Frank Tucker's Alzheimer's diagnosis came as a shock to his family. Less than a decade later, they made the difficult decision to move him into long-term care. As Here and Now's Henrika Wilhelm reports, staffing shortages and frequent calls home have Tucker's daughter now questioning that decision. She's worried for her dad's welfare. It's part of our ongoing series concerning care.
Oh my God, this is hilarious. My dad is the most hilarious man you'd ever want to meet. He's funny, he's caring, he's, his whole life was his family.
All that disrupted 8 years ago by Alzheimer's. Then, in October 2021, Frank Tucker made the move to Pleasant View Towers in St. John's.
We felt that the long-term care, even though we hated to do it, it was the safest place for him.
Cherise Tucker saw a change in her dad last July after he caught COVID.
He was never mean, right? And he just got mean. If we weren't there, he sensed that we weren't there and he was missing us. So his behavior would escalate, and it would escalate to the point that, he may shove someone or he may, get in someone's face and yell at them.
Those disruptions would prompt staff to call family, and Tucker was frequently sedated.
Oftentimes, when we would get there, it would be so easy to settle him. It was very frustrating for us. We would just distract him. His favorite chocolate bar is a Wonder Bar, right? So you pull out a Wonder Bar and he'd go, oh yeah, I'd like to have that. And then he'd go back to his room, he'd eat his Wonder Bar, he'd settle down, he'd be fine.
But not all staff know how to restrain. One night in September, police and paramedics were called instead. They took an agitated Frank here. His behavior was caused by a psychosis due to COVID. Medications were changed, but the calls home continued.
We had to have a meeting and say, we can't handle this anymore, it's too much. The reason why we put him here is because we can't care for him. But now it seems like we're still caring for him full time.
For Tucker, there's a lot lacking. lack of stimulation for residents, lack of communication between workers and management, and lack of staff. She says 6 workers care for 30 to 35 residents on Frank's unit.
You're dealing with patients who are trying to escape, who are incontinent, who are needing assistance trying to be fed. That's not enough people.
According to the Registered Nurses Union, 240 long-term care beds in the province are closed, unable to place people because of staffing shortages. One RN could care for as many as 40 to 110 residents at a time, sometimes more, on different units.
The expectation is that they're going to be cared for in a manner that you would care for your own family. And realistically, that's not what's happening today in our long-term care facilities because we just don't have the people.
Eastern Health refused an interview but did answer some questions via email. Of the 460 beds at Pleasant View Towers, 404 are in use. 481 nursing positions are staffed, 150 positions are vacant. Eastern Health says the staff-to-resident ratio depends on many factors. For example, on average, for the week of March 1st to 7th, 2023, about 31% of RNs and about 47% of LPNs and PCAs who work daily shifts at Pleasant View Towers were casual.
Temporary employees play a role when permanent employees are not available, but we're already seeing temporary employees' roles the numbers being depleted because they're actually working full-time equivalent hours themselves. They don't have time to do the basics. Have a conversation with a resident. They feel they're going into a room, doing the care that's necessary, and then exiting the room.
And for Cherise Tucker, that's not enough.
People have this vision of long-term care, and they think of some of the personal care homes that they have all these types of activities and stuff, but it's just not there. It's really not there. And I think if you have a loved one in long-term care, if you're not checking on them, they're not getting what they need.
Henrike Wilhelm, CBC News, Mount Pearl.
And our thanks to the Tucker family for sharing that personal story. If you or someone you know is struggling with home, respite, and long-term care, CBC News is looking to hear from you. If you'd like to share your story as part of the Concerning Care series, you can send an email to care-struggles@cbc.ca. Well, still with healthcare, pharmacists now have more power to assess patients and write prescriptions, and some of those services will be publicly funded. If someone comes into a pharmacy with shingles, an uncomplicated urinary tract infection, a fungal nail infection, or pink eye, for example, they can now be assessed and get a prescription. Hormonal birth control will also now be prescribed by a pharmacist. For several years, pharmacists have been able to prescribe for common minor ailments, but the patient had to pay. Assessments for those new conditions and a few others, like heartburn and cold sores, will now be covered by MCP. Pharmacists will now also be able to extend prescriptions for up to a year, and that cost will also be paid for as part of the $8 million that was set aside in this year's budget. Pharmacists say no longer requiring patients to pay for these services will keep people from going to emergency rooms for minor diseases.
There's a lot of times when I say, I would be able to do this assessment for you, however, it's X amount of money, and people do decide to go access the emergency room instead because they don't have the extra money, because maybe they also have to pay out of pocket for the actual prescription, like the product. So I think this is going to be really great in preventing that from happening as well.
And the government announcements continued today, this afternoon, for the tourism sector. After years of lobbying by hospitality groups, the rules are tightening for those who own short-term accommodations in this province. The Tourism Accommodations Act was proclaimed today in the House of Assembly, and those who don't comply with the new regulations will soon face fines. Here Now's Terry Roberts has the details.
Many of the short-term rentals in Newfoundland and Labrador advertised on online platforms like these are unregistered. No guarantee that they meet modern standards for safety or accessibility. Not paying business taxes to the municipality in which they operate, or collecting the levy for groups like Destination St. John's, the city's tourism and marketing arm. And that's long been a source of frustration for hospitality groups who represent the more traditional accommodations sector.
Our research is telling us that there's about 630 unlicensed operators in the St. John's area and about another 200 in the Northeast Avalon. So last year, that represented about $14 million in revenue.
Today, new rules came into force.
This is a professional industry, and we expect everybody to live up to that professional standard.
It's now mandatory that all short-term accommodations be registered with the tourism department. There's no fee to register, and it's a one-time process. But owners must ensure their properties are built to modern standards, which in some cases will require costly upgrades. And they must first register with their municipality, which could mean receiving a tax bill. Failure to register with the province could come with a maximum fine of $2,000. The new act includes inspection powers, but if you rent out rooms in your primary residence, you're excluded. The deadline to register is March 31st, 2024.
I think you can't say you're a professional and in an industry if you don't take safety, accessibility, and some of these other things seriously.
I want to make sure that when a visitor comes to our economy, that their level of expectation in what they're going to receive is as consistent as possible.
Online platforms have dramatically increased the exposure for short-term rentals, but regulating the sector is a nationwide challenge. Deadly incidents like this one recently in Montreal have intensified the focus on unregistered rentals, and online platforms like Airbnb are clamping down as well.
If you are not registered by, let's be clear, by March 31st, 2024, you will no longer have access to the platforms.
The growth in short-term rentals has helped spur tourism in rural communities. It's not known whether these new rules will drive many of them out of business, but advocates say the lack of oversight and regulation cannot continue. Terry Roberts, CBC News, St. John's.
And another announcement to tell you about. The provincial government announced funding today for a statue of a Newfoundland and Labrador feminist pioneer. The statue will be of Armine Nutting Gosling. Gosling led the fight for women in Newfoundland and Labrador to gain the right to vote. And the statue will show her handing out papers for the movement. Provincial officials announced $40,000 for the statue today, which will be installed in St. John's later this year.
It's important for little girls, you know, for gender diverse youth, and as well as adults across our province, to see statues that reflect who they are and to inspire them. I mean, you take yourself back, watching TV, you know, often we know men dominate positions in leadership and in politics. We know that's changing, but it's important for especially youth and all residents to see themselves reflected in our society in these sorts of positions.
It was a breezy day today, pretty much across the province. That's going to continue as we head through the day tomorrow. And then some weather moving in as we head towards the weekend. I'll have the details coming up.
This is street photographer Richie Perez. He's been showing up all over Newfoundland and Labrador, meeting folks and taking their pictures, but also talking to them and connecting with their stories, with their communities. Wednesdays this month on Here and Now, you will meet Richie and some of these people. We're calling it The Signal Connects.
This weather update is brought to you by the Healthcare Foundation Home Lottery. Bonus prize deadline is midnight, Thursday, April 6th. Order tickets now at hcfhomelottery.ca.
Well, pretty quiet today, I guess, weather-wise in the east. Chilly out there, but yeah, not too much going on.
No, there's not a whole lot going on, which is kind of nice. We're seeing a little bit of a break in the weather, but we do have some weather moving in. Let's talk about that. Yeah, of course we do. Let's take a look at what's going on right now out there across the province. You can see not a whole lot. We do have some cloud cover and a few flurries working their way across western portions of the island through the interior, but that is now ending. But if I zoom out a little bit, this area of low pressure, Colorado low, is going to bring some significant weather right along with it. And we will see some of that as we head towards Thursday night into Friday. So here's a look at what's going on right now. Even a potential for some tornado risk through parts of the states. And as it heads through to Ontario, there's that for the overnight period tonight and then into tomorrow. But as it heads towards Ontario, especially eastern areas of Ontario, you're looking at that freezing rain risk. That's going to move across the maritime provinces as we head through Thursday morning. Eventually, as we get into Thursday evening, then we start to see the results of that here in Newfoundland and Labrador. So as far as Labrador is concerned, you're looking at some snow from this one. It is weakening though as it moves. Actually, in fact, another area of low pressure is forming, but it is looking like we're going to see the risk of some freezing rain for a good chunk of the island as we head through the overnight Thursday into early Friday morning. A little bit of disagreement on just how much and if this transitions through to rain before it ends as we head into Friday morning. So we're going to keep an eye on that forecast as well. As far as what's going on right now, current temperatures are hovering around 1 to about 3 degrees across the island. And then 2 degrees in Happy Valley Goose Bay at the moment. The rest of Labrador, you're sitting into the minus single digits. And that will be even colder as we head through the night tonight. So currently, just like I said, those flurries are working their way and currently ending. But as we head through the night tonight, that chance of flurries will still continue pretty much along the west coast and in the higher elevations, as well as the northern peninsula and into the early morning hours. And we may see that risk of flurries yet again for the Avalon and then through central areas of the island. Now, as far as temperatures are concerned tonight, most will be sitting in the minus single digits, except the Avalon, which should be hovering around 0 or even +1 through the overnight tonight, up across Labrador, dipping to about minus 17 tonight in Lab City, with those winds gusting somewhere between 20 to as much as 40 or even 50 kilometers per hour. So these minus teens are going to feel a lot colder than that. As we head through the day tomorrow, still expecting the potential for some flurries through the day. However, some peaks of sun will certainly be in the mix through the afternoon. And as we head into late afternoon, early evening, the trend should be a clearing one, except along the west coast where we'll see those onshore flurries continue. But again, this will likely be in the higher elevations. Not a whole lot going on for those of you across Labrador. Now, as far as accumulations go, pretty much the only place we will see accumulation looks like it will be along the Long Range Mountains or in the higher elevations on the west coast. Otherwise, it will likely not stick, and that's just because of our temperatures, but you could pick up somewhere between 5 to 10 centimeters by the time we get into Thursday morning. Temperatures tomorrow above 0 for the most part, 1 to 2 degrees, but again, a breezy day tomorrow. Those winds out of the northwest between as much as 40 or even 70 kilometers per hour. Similar story as we head through central. You're looking at your temperatures hovering around 0 or even 1, maybe a little bit below that, but certainly as you head towards the west coast, those temperatures are going to be a little chilly with those winds out of the northwest, again, between 50 to as much as 70 kilometers per hour. Some sunshine certainly possible, those peaks of sun for the northern peninsula, but it does look like flurries and cloud cover. The story for southeastern Labrador, your winds will be out of the northwest again, fairly breezy, 40 to 60 kilometers per hour, and even up across the rest of the big land, Breezy day for you, 30 to 50 kilometers per hour. Temperatures generally around -4 as your daytime highs, maybe a little bit cooler than that in Churchill Falls. But we are looking at that weather moving in as we head towards the end of the week. So I'll get into those details a little later.
There's positives and negatives, and I'm hearing the negatives from our members who are worried about the workload and the ability to get time off to do this education.
New duties for RNs. Before long, they'll be writing prescriptions. Just ahead, On the Go host Anthony Germain gets feedback from the Registered Nurses Union.
With so many healthcare announcements in the last few weeks, it's almost enough to make you forget that more than or close to 1 in 3 people in the province don't have a family doctor. Yvette Coffee is president of the Registered Nurses Union, and she joins me now. Yvette, tell us a bit more about what registered nurses will be able to do once they get this RN prescribing designation. What does it mean?
Well, I don't have all the details. I heard the announcement yesterday just as well as our members did and the public. I am in the process of arranging a meeting with our college, our regulatory body, CRNNL, to get more specific details on what this will mean for registered nurses. I do know that they are targeting rural, remote, and specialized areas for RN prescribing. What that means for increased workload for NPs and physicians who would oversee the education for their registered nurse, what it would mean for increased workload for registered nurses. These are all big questions that our members are asking. And of course, with any increase in scope of practice, the question becomes, am I going to get extra compensation for taking on this extra responsibility?
What kinds of drugs and medicines will nurses be able to prescribe that obviously they can't do now?
Well, this is the information that will be seeking now from the college. And of course, this is not starting today. From what I understand, there's 3 modules of education that have to take place, which will take approximately a year. There's going to need to be policy changes within the employers, within the one provincial health authority, and discussions around scope of practice and the training. There's questions around whether or not people can get time off to do this education for the increased scope. Because right now they're not getting time off. If they go to an education day, they're usually pulled back out of it to staff a unit or a floor or a facility. So there's a lot of questions that we will be posing to our college, our regulatory body. Because, you know, what people don't understand is this is legislation requirements under the RN Act. And that is in the bailiwick of our college, our regulatory body, and government. We have no input into the legislative changes on scope of practice.
But let me ask you this, given the government's obviously moving in an area where they want to see the nurses doing different things, more things, figure out the compensation, the training. Pharmacists now, we're seeing these moves. This kind of news with reference to the nurses and the pharmacists, what does this mean for the 136,000 people in this province, according to the LMA, who don't have a family doctor?
Well, that leads me to the nurse practitioner issue here. In November, I stood side by side with the minister announcing that the directive was being sent out to all the RHAs to advertise and hire nurse practitioners for nurse practitioner-led clinics in the absence of primary healthcare providers for the 136,000 people in Newfoundland and Labrador. And to date, I have still not got an update on whether or not we've hired any nurse practitioners for this. Mm-hmm. I do know we have a shortage of nurse practitioners. I mean, we just increased the seats at schools of nursing to 40 from 20. We need to increase that further, because if we're going to get to 35 collaborative care clinics as per the health court recommendations, we need nurse practitioners in each of those teams. And if we're going to get to the care for the elderly population and aging at home, we need, I think it was a recommendation of like 60 nurse practitioners to be involved in the acute care. So when you're admitted to the hospital, to get you ready to go out either home, to have supports in place at home, to age at home, to go to a long-term care facility or another alternate level of care, such as personal care home. So all of that stuff leads me to say, what's going on and why is there such resistance, is the word I would use, to expanding that role for nurse practitioners?
Why did you feel it was necessary to put out a news release today on this nurse practitioner issue?
Because we've been asking for an update on this for quite some time now and have not gotten any update. And we have nurse practitioners out there who are being courted by other provinces. They're reaching out to them on their LinkedIn profiles. They're reaching out to them on their Facebook profiles, and actually actively recruiting our nurse practitioners to go work in other provinces such as Alberta. You know, when we have registered nurses and nurse practitioners here in Newfoundland and Labrador, who are the lowest paid in the country, it's not hard for other provinces to come and recruit them. And of course, with 752 registered nurse vacancies, I would say upwards of 100 nurse practitioner vacancies, if you count what the Health Accord and L is looking for. That's pretty sweet offer that's coming from other provinces where they're actively recruiting them, and I'm not seeing it here in this province.
Well, back to our top story now. A heated exchange today in the House of Assembly over the Atlantic Loop and the province's place in it. Last week, Ottawa announced it would invest in transmission line upgrades in Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. Now, David Brazel, the leader of the opposition, questioned the Premier today on whether Newfoundland and Labrador is being left out of the loop.
Let me be perfectly clear in this House, as I have been to multiple ministers within the federal government, Minister Champagne, Minister O'Regan, Minister Freeland, in fact, the Prime Minister himself, there is no loop without Newfoundland and Labrador. This is not a matter of opinion, although it is our opinion. It's not a matter of necessity, although it is. It is a matter of mathematical fact. There cannot be a loop that magically generates electrons on transmission lines without a source of generation. We are the source of generation that will feed the loop, and I can assure you the federal government understands that, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Official Opposition. Thank you, Speaker. According to the national media, the omission of Newfoundland and Labrador from the budget details was, and I quote, no accident. According to Finance Canada, the article states Nova Scotia and New Brunswick are negotiating directly with Quebec on green energy. I asked the Premier, have we been cut out of the Atlantic Loop? Good. The Honourable, the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, let me take the opportunity to continue to say there is no loop without Newfoundland and Labrador. It's a simple matter of distribution, Mr. Speaker, and generation, Mr. Speaker. The transmission lines themselves cannot generate electrons. We all know that. We have an incredible resource in Labrador, Mr. Speaker, that can be, will be, should be, and is recognized by the federal government as being critical with the Atlantic Loop, Mr. Speaker. We continue to be at the table with respect to the Atlantic Loop discussions, whether that's through Minister LeBlanc or Minister Wilkinson, in the tables that are appropriately designed for these high-level discussions, Mr. Speaker. And I can assure you that we are advancing Newfoundland and Labrador's position to ensure that we are the powerhouse that is required, not only for the Atlantic Loop, but for the rest of the northeastern seaboard, Mr. Speaker.
Speaker, the Federal Natural Resources Minister said negotiations are happening with Quebec. And again, I quote, most of the power is assumed to be coming from the Quebec grid. I asked the Premier, will Quebec be buying Newfoundland and Labrador electricity for pennies and then selling it to Nova Scotia and New Brunswick at a huge profit? The Honourable, the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I mean, I'm not sure where that came from, where that thought came from, Mr. Speaker, but of course, we're going to assure that we're going to, which study was that? Which study was that?
Order, please.
Come on, which study was that? Love to hear it. Which study? First of all, in the preamble, the member opposite suggested that we work with the other Atlantic premiers, the maritime premiers. I can assure you, they want Newfoundland and Labrador at the table. They've said that in the Atlantic premiers' meetings, Mr. Speaker. They don't want to be on bended knee to Hydro-Quebec either, Mr. Speaker. That's why this is a Canadian project that deserves Canadian inputs to ensure not only that we get the maximum value for our precious resource, that the end user can also get the value that doesn't have to be on bended knee to Hydro-Quebec, Mr. Speaker.
A big win in Prince Edward Island last night.
Voters tonight rendered a verdict, and they rendered it loudly and they rendered it clearly, and that verdict is that positive politics is alive and well in Prince Edward Island.
Yeah, that's Dennis King speaking to his supporters. His PC party walked away with a commanding majority, winning 22 of 27 seats. King will serve his second term of Premier of PEI. Well, that so-called positive politics Dennis King just mentioned may be alive and well, but turnout was historically low. In fact, it was the lowest voter turnout since elections PEI has started keeping track. CBC asked some people in Charlottetown why they think more people aren't coming out to vote.
I think it's disappointing. I think that people need to take advantage of the democratic process. There's no excuse not to have gone out. There were lots of advance polls. The weather's been good. So I'm really disappointed that more people didn't take advantage of the opportunity to express their opinion.
I know that a lot of people don't vote because it's just one number. It's not going to add too much to anything, but it does add up. So that's kind of why I was encouraged to vote.
The political education as to what the different parties are going for and what their goals actually mean for me. It didn't really help to influence me in any direction, so I didn't feel like it was worth me voting if I wasn't educated on what I was voting for.
Well, it makes me feel that it'll keep dropping, and then the community's less engaged.
Well, the head of Amnesty International Canada is accusing Air Canada of racism and discrimination. She says she was denied when she tried to board a flight to Mexico recently, even though she had all the necessary documents and is a permanent resident with official refugee status. CBC's Nicole Williams has the details.
Keri Nivyabandi travels a lot for her work. The Secretary General of Amnesty International Canada is originally from Burundi. She came to Canada several years ago as a refugee and is now a permanent resident here. She uses a government-issued refugee travel document instead of a passport because she's not yet a Canadian citizen. Last week, she went to the Ottawa airport to check into a flight to Mexico to attend a human rights conference there. But when she presented her paperwork, the Air Canada agent quickly became confused.
He seemed to have never seen a travel document of the sort.
After speaking with the agent, a manager who then called another agent on the phone, Nivyabandi was denied boarding because she didn't have a visa to enter Mexico.
I was shocked. I felt humiliated. I had been standing at that counter for over an hour.
Nivyabandi says she traveled to the same destination for the same purpose with the same airline in October. Even an email from the Mexican embassy confirmed she didn't need a visa.
I think the worst part is coming home to your children. My kids came home and found me home and said, "Mom, you didn't leave." I said, "No, they wouldn't let me board." And what does that tell my children as well? About who is allowed to board and who's allowed to fly and how people are treated.
Air Canada has since apologized to Nivyabandi, but it's also defending its actions. In a statement, it says travel rules are complex, especially with less commonly used travel documents. Airlines are also subject to penalty if they allow someone to fly without proper documentation. Air Canada now has the correct information, and Nivyabandi was able to fly a day later.
I think it's just another example of barriers that refugees face and something that we need to look at as best we can. It's, of course, it's not Canada's rules, it's the rules of the countries that people are trying to travel to. But perhaps there's more that we could be doing to ensure that these issues don't come up.
But the Secretary General says what happened to her shows just how much the rules are subject to interpretation, and she wants Air Canada to do better. Nicole Williams, CBC News, Ottawa.
Well, it was a historic day for Finland today. Today, the Nordic nation celebrates as it becomes the 31st member of NATO, drawing applause from member states, with the notable exception of Russia.
Let me start by welcoming Finland as the newest member of our alliance.
Finland's president calls it a great day. The move gives his country added support in an event of an aggressive attack. Since the Ukraine war, Finland has increasingly feared for the security of its own border with Russia. The Kremlin has long opposed Finland joining NATO and today warned that Russia would increase its military presence near Finland. Well, former U.S. President Donald Trump pleaded not guilty to 34 charges of falsifying business records today, charges that stem from hush money payments made to two women in 2016, including an adult film star.
President Trump, will you come speak to us? President Trump?
Now, the alleged payoffs to the two women were made to cover up Trump's extramarital affairs during his first presidential campaign. Another payment was allegedly made to a Trump Tower doorman who claimed to have a story about a child the former president had fathered out of wedlock. Trump's supporters and detractors rallied outside the courthouse. Trump has denied any wrongdoing and says the investigation is a personal and political witch hunt. He's returning to his Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida, where he's expected to hold a rally tonight. He's due in court next on charges in December. Well, an incredible fish story to share with you, and it's not a fisherman's yarn. New world records have been set for the deepest filming of a fish and the deepest catch of a fish. First, scientists filmed a snailfish more than 8,000 meters deep in the western Pacific Ocean. And a few days after the initial discovery, they set another record, this time in the Japan Trench, when they captured two snailfish. It was the first time the fish was ever caught in waters lower than 8,000 meters. Skis, dogs, and a rope in between. How one vet is staying fit and moving fast on the trails in Clarenville. Well, there's still some time left to get out and enjoy the snow before spring finally settles in. This winter, a veterinarian from Clarenville has been speeding down the local trails powered by her pooches. Have a look.
My name is Maxina Hunt. I'm a veterinarian as of 1998 when I graduated in Guelph. I've always wanted to be a vet. Dad was a doctor and I love animals, so put the two together and you get a veterinarian. Ski joring is, the history of it I'm not totally aware of, but I believe it's Scandinavian type of activity where somebody on skis, hence ski joring, is pulled by something else. Could be dogs. I've seen videos of people doing it with horses. Ski joring, for me, is being pulled by dogs while I'm on skis. Skis, poles, a harness for yourself, the harness for the dog, and the lines that connect you to the dog, and that's it. There's Oso, he's 13. He's the original dog that I started with, and he keeps all the other dogs straight. Maurice, who's 14, he comes from Natwishi. He's now mostly retired. Then there's Sissy, she's 7. She pairs up nicely with Oso. And then there's Goldie here, who's only 2 years old. She's a husky greyhound cross from a mushing kennel in Rigolette, and she's all gung ho. She's the fastest. So call me lucky, 'cause I'm guilt-free. They can't catch me. I'm so lucky. So call me lucky, 'cause I'm guilt-free. The North Atlantic Remote Vet Services is a not-for-profit, it's actually a clinic. We do remote clinics in Labrador and also around for the dogs up in coastal Labrador once a year. And then we go to remote communities in Newfoundland, like the South Coast, like Hermitage. We've done Galtus even. And for the feral cat populations, where we do trap, neuter, release. And we also do low-cost spay neuter clinics at the clinic in Clarenville, in the community veterinary hospital in Milton for people of low income. Yes, I'm lucky.
So sweet. It looked like those dogs were having a blast.
I imagine they have a great time doing that.
I don't think my dogs would like that very much.
I think Stevie would love it, actually.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
What about Drizzle?
Probably not. Yeah. Too much work.
All right, so we're going to have a look at the long-range forecast. So I guess looking ahead closer to the long weekend.
The long weekend.
Yeah.
Yes, it is looking like we're going to be a bit unsettled as we head there. As that area of low pressure that I showed you a little bit earlier is going to head in for that time frame. So let's just take a look at what's going to happen. Here is that area of low pressure. You can see it over Ontario. So that's Wednesday evening. It's going to work its way across the maritime provinces as we head into Thursday, and it's also going to bring some snow up across Labrador. It looks like by the time we get into the afternoon and evening hours, and then we start talking about the potential for some freezing rain later on, particularly through the overnight into the early morning hours on Friday. But overall, Thursday actually looks pretty nice. Nice spring day, temperatures between 1 and about 3 degrees across the island with some sunshine, but those clouds will be on the increase as the day goes on up across Labrador. Temperatures generally below 0. Coldest temperatures will be for Nain. You'll hover around -8, and again, you'll see that snow move in late day. So that freezing rain through the evening hours and into early Friday morning will pretty much work it at this point. Looks like it'll work its way through Central and the Avalon as we get into the early morning hours on Friday, and then some models showing that changing over to rain ending pretty much as rain. Northern Peninsula snow at this point, and then we're looking at snow for southeastern portions of Labrador as well. But that moves through fairly quickly through the day on Friday, but it will end, it looks like, onshore flurries for coastal areas, the west coast anyway, of the island for Good Friday. Now, as far as temperatures are concerned, they should be fairly warm, and that's why we're going to see that change over to rain. So even if we do see that freezing rain potential, it will all melt, and we're looking at temperatures between 4 and 6 degrees cooler for the Northern Peninsula, up across Labrador. Temperatures hovering around 0 for Happy Valley, Goose Bay, otherwise below 0. So as far as freezing rain potential goes, this is early, but at this point looking moderate, pretty much somewhere between 2 to as much as 5 millimeters is possible. We could see some pockets of higher than that, about 5 to 10 millimeters, but again, this should change over to rain. Long range forecast shows temperatures staying above 0 right through the weekend. We may see a few flurries Saturday morning, and then it should clear out actually, with flurries returning as we head into Sunday. For central Newfoundland, you're looking at a similar forecast as far as those temperatures are concerned. A little cooler though for western Newfoundland as we hang on to some onshore flurry activity through Saturday and Sunday. And then for eastern Labrador, flurries right through the weekend with a few peaks of sun in the mix for western Labrador. Just before we leave you tonight, just speaking of Labrador, that's Post Hill in the background, as far as Graham told me anyway, in Postville, Labrador. Thank you so much for sharing that great wintry shot with us. Love the blue sky always.
Oh, yeah.
If you have any to share with us, send them to Facebook, Twitter, or email to nlphotos@cbc.ca.
And the sun almost looks like it's kind of sitting
top of
on
the tree.
Yeah, like if we're a Christmas tree or something.
It does.
Yeah, well, that's it for us on this Tuesday evening. Thank you so much for spending part of your evening with us tomorrow. Hope you can join us again tomorrow.
Good night.